Hi, and welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll take calls in this segment on one of three topics. We'll talk about what Nintendo is doing, what you think about that. If you're a gamer, you know somebody is. How do you feel about the decision they made? They're not going to make gay avatars available to people in this new game that's coming out June 6th. What you think about the gay Gestapo putting this newspaper editor out of a job for exercising freedom of speech or freedom of the press. And by the way, freedom of the press, that is an individual right. That is not a collective right. It's not a right that belongs to newspapers. There are no collective rights in the Bill of Rights. They are individual rights. You have an individual right to the free exercise of religion. You have an individual right to freedom of speech. You have an individual right to freedom of the press. Individuals possess that right. The only reason newspapers have the right to freedom of the press is everybody that works for them, everybody that writes for them, has the individual right to freedom of the press. So consequently, the newspaper has it, not because it's a group right, but because every individual in that organization possesses that constitutional right. So this editor has a constitutional right to freedom of the press. And that right has been trashed, it's been shredded, it's been trampled by his own newspaper that's supposed to be all about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Want to get your reaction to that. So we'll take reactions to the Nintendo deal. We will take reactions to this newspaper editor being fired. And then I want to take comments also in this segment on Common Core. So that's a pretty wide range of topics for this segment. I'll talk about Common Core here in just a second. In fact, let me talk about that first, and then I got a couple of sound bites I'll play while you're calling in. 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Here's a federal test that shows that 12th graders, seniors in high school, are not improving in reading or math. Completely flatlined, so we're spending more money. We're getting fewer results, and Common Core is not going to help with any last bit of this. And then here is the story I want you to talk about. Here's a homeschooler, by the way, that is not getting hired because he's a homeschool grad. This company in Indiana, they actually accepted him. They made a job offer to him. This is a company called NiSource, N-I-Source, Inc. They actually offered this guy a job because they were impressed apparently with his resume and his interview. They offered him a job, found out he'd been homeschooled, and they rescinded the job offer. Homeschool educated students need not apply. Happy to take your reactions to that. Now, here's the deal in New Hampshire. This is a New Hampshire Guilford High School, and a father that protested this book got handcuffed. You might have seen the video. He actually got handcuffed, taken away by the police for protesting in a school board meeting the content of this book. Now, I cannot even read to you. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, if I read to you the content of this book that's sitting right in front of me, if I read this to you, I would be out of a job by the end of this segment. It's pornographic. And I can't read it on a nobody can read this. They couldn't even read this on network television. Their bosses wouldn't let them do it. It's so offensive. It's so pornographic that there's no place where this could be read in public. And yet, these 14-year-old freshmen are being required to read this book. It is required. And all the school is required to do, according to their policy, is let parents know that this book is going to be read by their students. But there's no warning about its content. And this time, these freshmen were given this book, and the parents weren't notified. So remember, you got freshmen coming in, unless they've got an older brother or older sister that's already been in this class, parents are not going to have any way of knowing anything about this book. And so if the notice isn't given, they're going to find out about it when their daughter, in the case of this guy, Walter Bayer, his daughter comes home with this book, and it's just pornographic. It basically features a scene where a high school student is being raped. At first she resists. She says no, then she gives in and enjoys it. I mean, it's just horrible. And it's explicit, and it's graphic, and it's pornographic. And the school is not apologizing for having this book in the curriculum. They're only apologizing that they didn't let parents know. The school board issued an apology, quote, for the discomfort of those impacted and for the failure of the school district to send home prior notice of assignment of the novel. So there is no apology for putting pornography in the hands of freshmen. Just an apology for not letting people know. So anyway, that's going on. And that's the danger of Common Core. At least in this case, the father can go to the school board in person and he can lodge a protest with people who can actually do something about it. This school board can do something about curriculum. If you've got Common Core where these decisions, these curriculum decisions about what books, for instance, are in the curriculum, what books you're going to be tested on. Remember, they want to align everything in Common Core. Everything's going to be all lined up. So the ACT test is going to be lined up with Common Core. The SAT test is going to be lined up with Common Core. All of these educational progress tests are going to be aligned to Common Core. So if Common Core says you got to read this book, then you got to read this book in order to be prepared for all of these tests. And this is going to be a decision made by bureaucrats sitting in cubicles in Washington, D.C. who do not care one iota about your child, about health, education, well-being, moral value, or whatsoever. Now, George Will, clip number 5, he's got a pretty incisive comment to make about Common Core here, and then we'll take your calls. We'll take them on Common Core. We'll take them on Nintendo, no gay avatars. We'll take them on the newspaper editor that got fired, 888-589-8840. Here is George Will talking about Common Core.
Core say, if you like local control of your schools, you can keep it, period. If you like your local curriculum, you can keep it, period. And people don't believe them for very good reasons. This is a thin end of an enormous wedge of federal power that will be wielded for the constant progressive purpose of concentrating power in Washington so that it can impose continental solutions to problems nationwide. You say it's voluntary. It has been driven by the use of bribes and coercion in the form of waivers from No Child Left Behind or race to the top money to buy the compliance of these 45 states, 2 of which, Indiana and I believe Oklahoma, have already backed out, and they will not be the last. Watch the verb align in this argument. They're going to align the SAT and ACT tests with the curriculum. They're going to align the textbooks with the tests. And sooner or later, you inevitably have a national curriculum that disregards the creativity of federalism. What are the chances, one, that we're going to have 5 or 6 creative governors experimenting with different curricula, or one creative, constant, permanent Washington bureaucracy overlooking our education? We've had 50 years now of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, 50 years of federal involvement that has coincided with stagnation in test scores across the country.
All right, so that's George Will just skewering Common Core. And this is my fundamental objection to it. It federalizes education. It concentrates power over the education system in Washington, D.C. This ought to be kept at the local level. If there's any issue where we ought to have local control and parental involvement, it is in education. We do not want bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., particularly with the liberal worldview of the average liberal making these decisions for our students. So let's go to the phones. Let's start with Adam, Ashland, Virginia. Adam, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind, Adam? Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me on the program, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Well, I heard the story on Nintendo, and I guess, I'm 28. I grew up playing video games, and, with all the stuff going on in the world, I guess video games are not very important, but I will say this, Nintendo's not a Christian company by any means, but they have always had more of a family tilt,
Yeah.
with the types of stuff they produce. And so, whereas you see a lot of the American, sorry, I'm choking up.
That's all right. You're doing fine.
Video game companies mostly have already compromised on the homosexual thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of odd to see, a completely secular Japanese company, taking such a neutral stance.
Yeah.
But it's refreshing.
Yeah, it is. And I think, Adam, part of what the concern is here is, yeah, it is just a video game, but you've got young people, like you mentioned, you grew up playing Nintendo games. And so you got people that are in their teens or preteens even playing these video games, and they present a world in which homosexual relationships are perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable, there's no warning there about all the disastrous health consequences associated with that behavior, then it can affect the way even young people start thinking about these issues. All right, Adam, appreciate the call. Thank you. Let's go to Robert in Morehead City, North Carolina. Robert, what's on your mind?
Hi, Brian Fisher. I'm actually just called in about the same topic as the previous caller.
Yes, sir.
To be honest, I'm a moderately. I play a lot of video games, and I'm even a part of a video gamers club. I'm actually the president. But one thing I do is actually minister. Although I'm 18, I actually go out and I try to witness to other gamers.
Huh.
And anyhow, I really think that Nintendo will break because the thing about gamers is that there are not a lot of Christian conservative gamers in the United States or anywhere for that matter. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to make Nintendo, fold. For example, there was this one video game. It was a Rainbow Six game. I forget. I think it was Liberty's Call or something like that. And they had, and in it, they had conservatives being the kind of the terrorist organization, and this international special forces unit had to put them down. GI kind of thought that was a kind of a touchy subject to touch on. GI, meaning Game Informer, thought that it was a touchy subject to hit on, but the developer of that video game said that video games need to be in the, I forget the name of the developer, video games need to be in the social conversation. Just because it is a video games are to set the example now.
Okay, so he was actually saying that he was accepting that video games have some kind of role in kind of shaping societal values. He says this is a good thing and we ought to embrace that.
Yeah, but I mean, it was on a different topic, but
yeah, I got you.
He was, yeah. I mean, I think Nintendo's
well, and it's interesting. It's interesting too, Robert, that Nintendo is not saying, "Look, we're not trying to make any statement here." In other words, they really don't have a philosophical opposition to having gay characters. They're just saying, "Look, we built this thing for the Japanese market. There's code there that we just don't have the time to go back in and retool." So I think I agree with you that if they had time, they probably would turn out a gay-friendly version of this game. Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll be right back. Stay with us.